Hi everyone, my name is Brittany Kabinski and I just want to welcome you all. It is now 1 p.m. so we will begin our presentation shortly. Today on Friday, June 15th, we will have our presentation on understanding the impacts and benefits of freight capacity improvements, environmental justice, and freight infrastructure. This presentation is going to be given by David Chandler, Nancy Pfeffer, and Sharlene Reed. For help during today's webcast, please feel free to type your questions in the chat box found in the webinar toolbar to the right of your screen or call 1-800-263-6317. For content questions, please feel free to type those in the questions box and we will be able to answer those at the end of the presentation during the question and answer session. Here's a list of the sponsoring chapters, divisions, and universities. I would like to thank all of the participating chapters, divisions, and universities for making these webcasts possible. As you can see, we have quite a few webcasts coming up in the next few months. To register for these upcoming webcasts, please visit www.utah-apa.org/webcasts and register for your webcast of choice. We are also offering some distance education webcasts to help you get your ethics or law credits before the end of the year. These webcasts are available to view at www.utah-apa.org/webcast-archive, and you can follow the instructions listed on the webpage for how to log your distance education CM credits. You can also follow us on Twitter at Planning Webcast or like us on Facebook, Planning Webcast Series, to receive up-to-date information on the Planning Webcast Series sponsored by chapters, divisions, and universities. And to log your CM credits for attending today's webcast, please go to www.planning.org/CM and select today's date, which is Friday, June 15th, and then select today's webcast, which is Understanding the Impacts and Benefits of Freight Capacity Improvements, Environmental Justice, and Freight Infrastructure. This webcast is available for 1.5 CM credits. And we are also recording today's webcast, and that will be available along with a PDF of the presentations at www.utah-apa.org/webcast-archive. And at this time, I'm going to introduce our speakers for today, David Chandler, Nancy Pfeffer, and Sharlene Reed. Sharlene Reed is a community planner with the Federal Highway Administration Office of Planning, Transportation Planning Capacity Building Team. She is responsible for providing guidance on scenario planning, visualization, smart growth, and livability and PEL activities. Prior to coming to Federal Highway Administration, she served as a transportation planner with the District of Columbia Department of Transportation. She is a recipient of the Dwight D. Eisenhower Fellowship, a graduate of George Washington University's Certified Public Manager Program, and AASHTO Executive Leadership Program at Indiana University, Purdue University, Illinois, Indiana. She received her Bachelor's of Art in Political Science and her Master's of Urban and Regional Planning from the University of the District of Columbia. Nancy Pfeffer is President and Network Public Affairs and provides public policy analysis and communications services to public and private sector clients, focusing on environmental and transportation issues. Her clients include the Gateway Cities Council of Governments, the Los Angeles County Metropolitan Transportation Authority, and the Transportation Research Board. Her current work focuses on regional planning and land use issues, including greenhouse gas emissions reduction and environmental justice analysis for major regional transportation projects. Before founding NPA, she spent 7 years working for the Southern California Association of Governments, SCAG, and previously worked in environmental policy and compliance for ARCO, an integrated oil company, and Martin Marietta, an aerospace company that is now part of Lockheed Martin. She has a master's degree in public policy from the University of Southern California School of Policy, Planning, and Development and a bachelor's degree from Harvard. David Chandler joined the Center for Neighborhood Technology in 1994. Previously, he had been the Director of Research and Planning and a senior consultant for FranCorp, Inc., a firm specializing in franchise development and consulting. During 11 years at FranCorp, Mr. Chandler supervised or executed the planning of 150 franchise companies' expansion programs. Among his clients were Hershey Foods, Southwest Bell, Hercules Tire and Rubber, and Presbyterian St. Luke's Hospital. At FranCorp, Mr. Chandler also hired and mentored the consultants who became the founders of the iFranchise Group. Before entering business, Mr. Chandler was the first executive director of the Greater Chicago Food Depository, the Second Harvest Food Bank for the Chicago metropolitan area. And since coming to CNT, Mr. Chandler has been the organization's senior analyst for projects that involve private business development. As CNT's representative, he has advised community organizations and municipalities on transit-oriented development projects and contributed to research in this field. He's managed the Chicago area's location-efficient mortgage program, conceived and launched the Connections for Community Ownership program that helped aspiring minority entrepreneurs become business owners, and managed CNT's Freight Transportation Initiative, conceived and launched the Smart Growth and Industrial and Community Development program. He holds a BA in anthropology from the University of Chicago, and he and his family have lived in the Pilsen community for 25 years. And David Chandler is going to be our first presenter today, so I'm going to hand it over to him.
Okay.
There you go, David.
Well, thanks so much, Brittany. Yeah, let's just see if I can put my PowerPoint on the right place. I think that's it, right? Show my screen. Good. So are we there seeing the screen of the PowerPoint?
Yep, we're seeing it.
Okay, very good. Well, thanks everybody for joining the conversation this morning. I hope that that this is an interesting case study that we wanted to present to you. I think we think that it has some interesting implications for older industrial communities around the country. Before we kind of launch into the subject of the presentation exactly, I should probably say a little bit about the Center for Neighborhood Technology, because that might help understand, to frame the context of the presentation. CNT is a 33-year-old not-for-profit organization that we sometimes call ourselves a think and do tank that has a double purpose. We're always involved in improving the economic well-being of the community and at the same time improving its natural environment. CNT's programs include an energy conservation program that does hundreds of housing units each year, and a car sharing program called IGO that has about 18,000 members. We're the author of the Housing Plus Transportation Index that many folks in the planning community are familiar with, and we do a lot of work in terms of working with communities to execute transit-oriented development projects and what we call cargo-oriented development projects, which we will be talking about today. I think this audience is all entirely familiar with the concept of transit-oriented development, the idea of putting, building up communities with some density around nodes of transit service and achieving a pedestrian-friendly environment that has a mix of uses, and all the benefits that flow from that kind of development, including the reduction of residents' transportation costs and increased travel choice and improved health from people having more exercise, as well as reductions in fuel consumption and air pollution. And in this session, we want to talk both about transit-oriented development and linking it to another concept that we call cargo-oriented development, which is a matter of building industrial developments and logistics businesses in very close proximity to multiple modes of freight transportation. And the benefits of cargo-oriented development, which we'll get into, include large reductions in the cost of fuel by reducing truck movements, and also shortening the amount of commuting time to locations where factories are located, if you can place those close to an urban area, as well as intermodal freight facilities. And the key feature of cargo-oriented development that we want to focus on is job creation. This little chart sort of shows you the kind of job growth that we can think of as being possible with this kind of development. We think of freight transportation jobs typically in terms of the direct freight transportation movement, railroad movement, truck movement. But the jobs that are associated with the logistics companies that want to be close to intermodal facilities, and the manufacturing jobs that want to be close kind of dwarf the number of jobs involved in actual freight movement. And that's why it's so important to achieve a good land use connection between freight transportation and land use and freight transportation. When we started at C&T becoming interested in these two concepts together, we were looking for older communities where both the opportunities for both transit-oriented development and cargo-oriented development occurred in the same place. Actually, that's not hard to do because so many of our urban communities and older interior suburban communities grew up around freight transportation. And the same facilities, very often the same infrastructure, is used to move both freight and passenger rail, especially in commuter rail lines. The particular place that we focused on in this work are the southern suburbs of Chicago, an area of about 42 suburbs that go directly south from the city of Chicago. And this area has suffered from, as an industrial area, has suffered from high unemployment that's occurred gradually over the last generation as the level of industrial employment has contracted. And it's been also reflected in terms of lower median household incomes in many of our communities in the south suburbs than in other parts of the region. But the area also has an amazing sort of combination of assets that allow it to come back through a combination of TOD and COD. There are about 6 major, 5 of the 6 major Class 1 railroads and several other railroads operate facilities in the area. It includes 4 intermodal freight terminals, a subject that we'll get back to in just a minute in terms of the importance of these kinds of facilities that are magnets for industrial development. Following the freight lines over time, that's how the expressway network was built up. So we have half a dozen significant expressways that crisscross through this area. And as I mentioned, in terms of transit, is also here. There are about 33 active commuter rail stations in the south suburban area, and another proposed line that will bring the total to 42. So virtually every town in this region is served by passenger rail as well as by an active bus network. There are also a number of sites in this older industrial area that are now vacant land from the contraction of the industrial industries. And many of these properties are brownfields, but they're in large blocks. They're very close to the freight transportation assets. There are about more than 3,000 acres of such land that has more than 10 contiguous acres and has all these cargo-oriented development location advantages. So when we put all these things together, it sort of makes a rich network of opportunities for both cargo-oriented development and transit-oriented development. When we looked at this area to sort of pick a couple of towns that had these kinds of assets in spades, we used a tool that we call an optimizer, which basically combines any number of characteristics of sites that we want to look at, integrates them using a chi-squared statistical methodology in order to rank them according to the set of variables that you have in the analysis. And so in this, through this method, we ended up working, selecting 2 towns that we worked with initially with most intensity. A town called Blue Island that's about a 175-year-old town that has this rich combination of 3 railroads that are passenger railroads, about 90 passenger movements a day between this location and the Chicago Loop. And also has in the sort of purple areas there large industrial areas that are also served by rail. And an older industrial community, Harvey, Illinois, which has had perhaps a harder time adjusting to what's happened in the economy than Blue Island. There's a great deal of poverty in the town, but it has sort of magnificent freight transportation assets. A part of the town is taken up by an intermodal freight terminal that is on its way to becoming the most active of the Chicago area's 21 intermodal freight terminals, and a great deal of industrial land that's close to that. We'll talk a little bit more about that terminal in a second. When we worked with these towns, we did a sort of bottoms-up planning process to help folks think about the assets that they had in the town and how they could plan around their full utilization. Blue Island really picked up on its riverfront TOD opportunities, only within half a mile of its rail station, and Harvey picked up especially on its industrial opportunities, which are next door to the Canadian National Intermodal Freight Terminal there. But as many of you have realized, moving with towns that have low income areas, having a plan is one thing, having execution is another when you have to derive your income and many of the resources for the development from a series of public programs. But we found that going beyond working with our two pilot towns, the sort of initial success that we had with them encouraged the Council of Governments organization, the sort of membership organization of the 42 suburban towns in the south suburbs, to jump into the program of adopting cargo-oriented development and transit-oriented development as a central economic development policy. The combined effort of the towns enable us to start an active brownfields cleanup program that has both a large intercommunity assessment program and an active cleanup program that's now affecting half a dozen major sites. An information management system, including a GIS atlas that allows us to describe the individual sites in great detail. Corridor market analysis that we've done for looking at both the TOD sites as corridors and the industrial sites as networks, and regional marketing to help the investment community understand these assets. We call this sort of integrated strategy our green time zone, which stands for transit, intermodal, manufacturing, environment. And there are many individual programs now that have spun out of our strategy that are helping us implement these TOD and COD programs, so allowing us to, we're now in sort of the final stages of creating a sort of groundbreaking residential on-the-river project in Blue Island. And we're focusing in Harvey on the logistics opportunity, the cargo-oriented development opportunity there, where a new rail line, dedicated rail line between the Canadian port of Prince Rupert, going with a straight line to Chicago, has opened a new route between Asia and the Chicago area, and CN is tripling its freight volume through this terminal, which has a more or less direct impact on the value of land, because the volume of freight that moves through affects the value of the property that is around the terminal, the places where both logistics and manufacturing operations want to be. All of this activity sort of pours into a timeline, based on the TOD-COD analysis, having the information available, being able to use public sector resources to control land. I should mention that one of the major contributions in this process has been a Sustainable Communities Challenge grant that was received just in 2011, and we're using that as the basis to create a structured fund and an investors consortium to move substantial investment into the execution of many of these plans. We should also mention, when we talk about the use of cargo-oriented development in particular as an economic development mechanism, that there are serious environmental considerations to think of. Many of you may be familiar with the reports of the California Air Quality Board, which have cited the seriousness of traditional, conventional intermodal freight terminals as sources of pollution. And so as we bring back into industry, into the towns that had an industrial base originally, we want to avoid the pollution that goes with them. And fortunately, there are technological fixes for that that include new technology that's being built as part of our manufacturing base. The National Railroad Equipment Corporation, for example, has a locomotive that they call it was now used by other companies, called the genset locomotive, that dramatically reduces the level of pollution that is associated with rail locomotive movements, especially within terminals. A very interesting company called MyJack Corporation, which also is located in the southern suburbs of Chicago. Their basic business is the manufacture of cranes for making intermodal freight movements. And they now have a hybrid crane that uses only a fraction of the energy and generates only a fraction of the air pollution that's involved in the movement of these products. Perhaps even more exciting is a system for freight terminal management that dramatically reduces the amount of dwell time that trucks have in the terminal. This ATMS system that MyJack has developed, and I should mention that besides being a manufacturer, MyJack also is in the business of managing intermodal freight terminals for corporations, for railroad corporations. And the ATMS system, which is only at this point only pieces of it are assembled, but there's a number of projects in which the full system is being considered for implementation, can dramatically reduce the emissions that are associated with and the noise and other factors that are associated with intermodal terminal movements. Another really important feature of the ATMS system in its efficiency is that it uses only a fraction of the land mass, the footprint that's involved in a traditional intermodal freight terminal. So instead of needing 200 acres, you can get by with maybe 80 acres. The implications of this are very large because modern intermodal freight terminals in the last 10 years have been built out in exurban areas. The exurban locations of those facilities have been sort of the driving edge of sprawl into new areas, creating industrial parks, followed by housing, followed by services, followed by all the things that are involved when you build a new community and abandon the community that you had before. But with the MyJack system, it'll be possible to retrofit many older existing rail facilities in interior suburbs and urban communities to perform intermodal functions, and we can continue to rebuild and do infill development for cargo-oriented development instead of moving to the exurbs. That's an important, those kinds of considerations we think are important, not just to Chicago, but to approximately 45 other regions in the country that have both fixed guideway transit systems and intermodal freight terminals. Pick a large city, it's probably one of those. And so we're interested in moving from the work that we've done in Chicago to thinking about what the further national implications of that work are. So those are the things we wanted to bring to your attention this morning for consideration. And so I'll just conclude my remarks with that.
All right, great. Thank you, David. Let's go ahead and I'm going to switch over to my screen. And Sharlene, you are good to present now.
Great. Can you all hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Hello? Perfect. Good afternoon. From Washington, D.C. This is Sharlene Reed. I'm a community planner here at the U.S. Department of Transportation. And I want to talk a little bit about environmental justice and some of the movements that have happened over the course of the year. Just to take you back a little bit, to remind you about the Executive Order 12898, which was signed off on President William J. Clinton on February 11th, 1994. The purpose of that order was to reaffirm that each federal agency must make environmental justice part of its mission by identifying and addressing disproportionately high in adverse human health or environmental effects of its programs, policies, activities on minority and low-income populations. And this was a directive that just told federal agencies that you need to consider what the impacts of your actions are on low-income and minority communities, because the Civil Rights Act from 1964 didn't look at low income as a criteria. Let's go to the next slide. Out of the executive order of 1994, the Interagency Work Group on Environmental Justice was developed. And just a little more background, in 2010, the Obama administration renewed the federal government's commitment to environmental justice, appointing a senior advisor on environmental justice at the EPA and reinvigorating the EJ Interagency Work Group, which was established originally by the executive order, with an increased focus on public involvement and public engagement. The IWG, which is the Interagency Work Group on Environmental Justice, purpose was to guide, support, enhance federal environmental justice and community-based activities. So in August of 2010, 17 agencies recommitted to environmental justice by signing off on an MOU. And some of those agencies which committed to this effort included EPA, which leads the effort, Department of Agriculture, Commerce, Defense, Education, Energy, Health and Human Services, Homeland Security, Housing and Urban Development, Department of Interior, Justice, Labor, State, the Department of Transportation, Veterans Affairs, GSA, the Small Business Administration, and several offices within the White House itself. Let's go to the next slide. One of the major issues or efforts under the IWG was that each agency that recommitted to this effort was to take a look at their environmental justice strategy that was developed originally and either update it or revamp it. A lot of agencies decided that they wanted to update their efforts just to keep it consistent with some of the issues that are occurring in the 21st century. And in looking at their environmental justice strategy, what some of the requirements were that each agency would do an annual environmental justice progress report and seek meaningful public input for the environmental strategies. On February 27th of this year, several federal agencies announced their new updated environmental strategies and produced an annual implementation report. Each agency had a unique and an important role to ensure that all communities receive the health and environmental protections that they deserve. These strategies and implementation reports outline steps each agency would take to protect these communities that were facing greater health and environmental risks, specifically minority and low income. And within the EJ strategy, the objectives were to promote the enforcement of all health and environmental statutes in areas with minority populations and low-income populations, ensure greater public participation, which is a really big tenet within its environmental justice strategy, improve research and data collection relating to health of and environment of minority and low-income population, and identify differential patterns of consumption of natural resources among minority populations and low-income populations. In addition, the environmental justice strategy shall include, where appropriate, a timetable for undertaking identified revisions and consideration of economic and social implication of those revisions. So they wanted to not just look at what the impacts were, but to actually have a forward-thinking processes associated with this. The IWG, in its reinvigorated effort, is working in collaboration with the Department of Housing, Transportation, and EPA under the Livability Initiative to improve access to affordable housing, to provide more transportation options, lower transportation costs while protecting the environment and communities nationwide. And in an effort to do this, they are holding stakeholder dialogue sessions throughout the nation. They started in 2011 and they will continue in 2012. Let's move forward to the next slide. Within the EJ strategy, some of the specific efforts that you have to undertake is that you have to review each department-wide efforts on environmental justice and making sure that EJ is considered in all emphasis areas within your department. there needed to be additional clarification between environmental justice and Title VI because a lot of these issues have been commingled over the years. So several work groups within the IWG have been developed to make sure that we provide much more clarity as we move forward for the differences between Title VI and environmental justice. And in order to ensure consistencies, that's where the greater reporting requirement has come about, and that happens every year now. And cross-training and interagency efforts are being encouraged, just like I said, through the livability initiative, as well as working in these work groups, these different agencies coming together to leverage their efforts. Let's go to the next slide. Also within the environmental justice strategies, there were 4 new focus areas that were highlighted. NEPA has always been a part of environmental justice, and Title VI has always been a part of environmental justice. But 2 new focus areas, the emphasis is on climate change and goods movement. And goods movement specifically is related to the whole issue of freight and environmental justice. There was also an added component to look at transportation access to jobs and the quality of transportation services within these EJ communities. The first report that was released happened in December 12th of 2011, and then the annual reports to talk about what had happened was issued in February of this year. And if you take a look at the EPA website, it will highlight each agency's implementation report and their EJ strategy. Let's move forward to the next slide. An additional advisory council that came out of the executive order was NEJAC, the National Environmental Justice Advisory Council. And this is a federal advisory committee to EPA, and this was established on September the 30th in 1993. The council provides advice and recommendations about broad, cross-cutting issues related to environmental justice from all stakeholders involved in the environmental justice dialogue. In addition, the NEJAC provides a valuable forum for discussions about integrating environmental justice with EPA priorities and initiatives. The council's major objectives are to provide advice and recommendations about EPA's efforts to integrate environmental justice considerations into their agency programs, improve the environment or public health in communities, address environmental justice by ensuring meaningful involvement in EPA decision-making, and a couple of other issues. But what I really wanted to highlight about NEJAC is that EPA put out a plan 2014, and comments are being solicited as we now speak. They're also having a series of public meetings on July 24th and 25th of this year to talk about EPA's Plan 2014. So I want to encourage you all to take a look at the plan. They had a slight amendment just recently because they wanted to put a little more emphasis on Title VI within their plan as well. So take a look at EPA's website for that. Let's move forward. And here at the Department of Transportation, we've worked aggressively to ensure that policy guidance and training related to environmental justice has been updated and incorporated into all our program areas, activities, and plans. Next slide. Now I just want to let you know that DOT looks at environmental justice. We want to avoid, minimize, and mitigate disproportionately high and adverse human health and environmental effects. We've got 3 principles that lead us to make sure that we identify and address those issues in environmental justice communities. And what we've done over the last year is that we've updated the US DOT Order 5610.2, which is now going to be .2a on environmental justice. We define what minority was within that, looking at those protected populations, which include Black, Hispanic, Asian American, American Indian, and Alaskan Natives. And we also incorporated the OMB definitions for Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islanders. The Federal Highway Order 6640.2 was recently updated and signed off on as well. And what we looked at specifically in that was low income and the definition for low income as it's been reported by the Department of Health and Human Services. And that sets poverty guidelines as eligibility criteria when you're looking at low income communities. We're going to go to the next slide. So other efforts within the department of Transportation was that new guidance was developed and issued to our practitioners in December of last year, and we are currently working on an environmental justice forum that is scheduled to be held in July. Again, guidance, tools, and training are the focus areas within the DOT that we're promoting and trying to move forward. Move to the next slide. The Federal Transit Administration put out in September of 2011 two proposed circulars. And the first circular is on environmental justice policy guidance for FTA recipients, and the other one is the Title VI. Those should be released shortly. And again, what the efforts were within FTA was to make sure that there was clarity and a distinction between what environmental justice requirements were and what Title VI requirements were. FTA views both Title VI and environmental justice as equally important considerations when planning, designing, constructing, operating, and maintaining FTA-funded transportation projects and delivering FTA-funded programs and services. I just recently had an opportunity to reread these two documents, and I really do want to encourage you all to take a look at them when they get posted. They should be posted sometime in July, so look for the Federal Register for that action. And the next slide talks about a guidebook that was put out by the Federal Highway Administration in July of last year entitled Emerging Trends and Best Practices, Environmental Justice and Transportation. And this report was funded by DOT, Federal Highways, and the STEP program here in Federal Highways. And it focuses on timely and relevant transportation issues. This case study document helps promote a deeper understanding of the responsibilities, opportunities, and benefits derived when addressing environmental justice and transportation planning and implementation. There are 4 topic chapters which focus on foundational issues such as transit and affordability and how it affects communities, access to opportunities and public involvement, or emerging trends such as livability and road pricing. And they highlight noteworthy case studies and best practices that promote environmental justice in the transportation decision-making process. So go to the next slide, because that's the last slide. But I just want to say this has been a very exciting 12 months here at the U.S. Department of Transportation and at EPA and the other agencies that signed on to this commitment to environmental justice. And so you'll see a lot of training moving forward in environmental justice, and we want to encourage practitioners who actually work for agencies as well as those who work for non-governmental organizations to take advantage of the training that we're moving forward so that there's a consistent message on how we deal with low-income and minority communities. So I want to thank you for listening to me about the new initiatives that are put out there, and feel free to look at our website and the Federal Highway Administration, DOT Environmental Justice, for any upcoming events that we have planned. Or feel free to give me a call at the number listed. Thank you, Brittany.
All right, thanks, Sharlene. We're going to hand it over to Nancy, and we should have all of the contact information at the end as well. So if you haven't gotten a chance to jot it down, you'll get it later.
Okie doke. Hi, everybody. Thank you very much. And I'm going to go ahead and talk about another case example. This is in Southern California. We have the I-710 corridor project. There's a lot going on with this project, and the piece that I wanted to highlight with respect to infrastructure and environmental justice is our community participation framework. So I'll talk about how that evolved from prior phases of the project. And why it's kind of a noteworthy example of community engagement in this major infrastructure project that's very significant for freight transportation. To get started, I want to give you a little bit of context about goods movement and health in California. In the state of California, since 1998, the state declared that diesel exhaust is a human carcinogen. I think we were one of the leading government entities to do that, and so it really has focused the public attention on the health impacts and the emissions from sources of diesel pollution, especially in the goods movement arena. What we had in the early 2000s and starting really all through that decade has been a very dramatic growth in freight through California, both through the large ports here in Southern California, LA and Long Beach, which I'll talk about a little bit more, but we also have a major port in Oakland and San Diego and several smaller ports up and down the coast. So all of those really began to experience a huge increase in freight transiting through those areas, and that created a lot of public awareness and concentration on the emissions and the congestion, all of the impacts that came from those increases in freight transportation. So in the 2000s, the State Air Resources Board and also our Business Transportation and Housing Agency collaborated on a couple of different parallel efforts that I've listed here: the Goods Movement Emission Reduction Plan, which was published in '06, and the Goods Movement Action Plan published in '07, but they really were very concurrent efforts that went on. And I did want to highlight, I think David alluded to this earlier, that the State Air Resources Board, that's CARB there, the California Air Resources Board, estimated 2,400 premature deaths a year resulting from pollution related to goods movement sources. And just to give you a range, their range was really something like 700 up to as many as 4,000 deaths, and this was just the kind of the center of their estimates. So really, compared with other sources of public health impact, a very significant thing that they wanted to address. The Goods Movement Action Plan was a multiple stakeholder process. I participated in the development of that when I was at SCAG, and that really laid out not only an infrastructure investment plan and financing plan, but also an emissions reduction plan that is still being carried out by the Air Resources Board and also locally. Again, for the local context here in Southern California, again, because of this dramatic increase in containerized cargo coming in through the ports of LA and Long Beach, we've had a lot of growing awareness among community groups and a growing opposition to expanding capacity to meet all of this growing demand. So there's been a kind of a halt placed on some of the projects for many years during the middle of the 2000s as community said, wait a minute, we've got health impacts here, and we don't want to just see you build more and more and more facilities. Just to mention briefly a couple of the actions that have been done here in LA and Long Beach in response to all of that: the Clean Truck Program, which is part of their Clean Air Action Plan that they did jointly, again, in 2006. So you can see all this was happening around the same time. And that Clean Truck Program has accelerated the turnover of the trucking fleet serving the ports here in Southern California to the extent that the particulate matter has been reduced by 70%, which is a really great achievement, and I think it will continue to do more. And there are also annual emissions inventories being done by both ports that show continuing reductions in pollutant emissions. There are many more aspects to the Clean Air Action Plan, but I just wanted to mention those two by way of context for what I'll talk about here. Focusing in now on Southern California, just to give you the lay of the land a little bit, and I do have a map that's coming up in a few slides, but LA and Long Beach, in case you're not familiar with them, are the largest port complex in the United States when taken together. And they really dwarf the next nearest, which is New York, New Jersey, and they were about, I don't know, maybe three times the size in terms of throughput, so really much, much larger. I say about sixth largest in the world. The position has shifted a little bit as some of the Asian ports are growing, but it's still a very, very substantial port complex. And these two ports here, just LA and Long Beach, handle 40 to 45% of the nation's containerized imports, which is really a pretty staggering number when you think about it. That cargo can go anywhere within the local area, or it also goes national. These are some estimates of the breakdown, and it depends exactly where you draw the line. But it's really noteworthy that cargo coming in here in LA and Long Beach goes to every state in the nation. So that gives you a sense of the impact. Container volumes may triple by 2035. I think that's really the big issue that we're dealing with here. How do we continue to serve the goods movement industry and reap some of these employment and tax revenue benefits that are listed here We've got obviously a very large number of jobs that are supported directly and indirectly, both locally in our Southern California region as well as nationally. Jobs are related to the Southern California ports here because of the reach of that cargo. So it really is very significant, including the tax revenues. And so we don't want to lose that economic benefit, but at the same time we do need to address concerns with the impacts locally. So focusing in on the I-710 freeway corridor, and again I'll show you a map in a couple slides, but the 710 freeway is the primary freeway truck route that serves LA and Long Beach. And as you can see, we've got a current level of daily truck traffic that's pretty substantial, but we're looking at the potential for it to really rise dramatically as the freight grows. And even with the current recession, we're talking about long-term trends out to 2030, 2035 even, where we do see that that is going to resume. And we also, because of the concentration of trucks, we have the most truck-related accidents on the 710. So these are just to give you an indication of some of the concerns. And just to show you this in another way, some of you may have seen this photo, but this is one of the iconic photos on goods movement in Southern California. This is looking at the I-710 northbound from the ports of LA and Long Beach. This location is about a quarter of a mile from the office where I'm sitting right now. And this was taken probably in the early 2000s and just shows you how you've got this wall-to-wall effect of trucks on the 710 freeway coming out of the port complex. You'll notice that left-hand lane is where the cars are squished into, and this is still something you can see today even with the economic recession. And then superimposed on that is a graph, again, showing the expected growth, and this only goes to 2020, so you can see that it's really going to be pretty dramatic. Just wanted to show you that visual image. Here's the map that I've been promising. If you look down at the bottom of that shaded area, you'll see the Port of Los Angeles and Port of Long Beach, and then the I-710 is the corridor that is marked in the dashed line going all the way up 18 miles is the entire corridor. And as I may not have mentioned, we're now in the stage of producing an EIR, Environmental Impact Report, under California law, combined with an environmental impact statement under federal law. So that's where the project's at right now. I wanted to show you a little bit about the demographics of the corridor to make the point about environmental justice and why it's of concern, and I'm doing this in graph form rather than on a map, but just to show you these two slides. This one compares the LA County demographics, racial and ethnic groups with the corridor that you just saw highlighted on the previous slide. And you can see, of course, that the corridor has greater concentrations, substantially greater concentrations of minority, i.e. non-white residents, and also Latino residents are much higher, and a lower concentration of non-Hispanic white residents in the corridor compared with the county. So that's one comparison. And then this slide shows for income groups. On the left-hand side are the three poverty levels, looking at poverty and 1.5 and 2 times poverty, and then looking at the income quintiles, quintile 1 being the lowest income quintiles and quintile 5 the highest. And you can see again that the corridor has a higher concentration, really skewed towards the lower income groups than the county as a whole. So environmental justice is definitely of great concern within the I-710 corridor. And to summarize what some of the key community concerns have been, I think I mentioned this earlier, coming from the state concerns, and really this has gone, I think, in both directions, from the local to the state and back again. Really adverse air quality, especially related to diesel emissions, understanding that there are so many trucks out on the roadways, as you saw in the photo. Very much concern about respiratory illness. We have in many areas in the corridor demonstrably higher asthma rates among children. Also concern about cancers related to respiratory effects, emphysema. There are many potential causes for these things. So not all of that is sorted out, but certainly there's a great deal of community concern about these observed health impacts in the community, and seeing that diesel pollution can certainly be a contributor to that. Obviously, we have congestion and safety issues. I think you saw, again, that slide really tells it all. The photo is, like I said, an icon of the issues that we have here in Southern California. and likewise the accident rate related to trucks. In terms of community separation, this freeway's been here for a long time. I believe it was built around the 40s or the 50s. So communities know that that freeway is there, and yet there is still a lot of community interaction across the freeway. And so one of the issues also with the corridor is how do we maybe help to knit communities back together, especially as we may be creating more infrastructure in the corridor to accommodate all of the additional freight growth that we see. So this is a formal purpose and need statement for the project at this point. And again, you see that these issues reflect those concerns that I just reviewed. So we want to improve air quality and public health. Note that that's the very first thing on the list. Improve traffic safety, address design deficiencies of this older freeway, particularly on and off ramps when you're talking about 18-wheelers. And it's very, very common to hear about a jackknifed tractor trailer on any one of the many on and off ramps all the way up and down the 710. Addressing projected traffic volume and the growth that you saw projected in the earlier slide, and also just to address the projected growth in economic activity, population, employment that are related to the substantial amount of freight movement that we have here in Southern California. So turning to the project history a little bit and just telling you kind of how this evolved in the early 2000s, given all of these concerns about the capacity of the freeway. There was a traditional major corridor study done in the early 2000s, and it developed various alternatives for expanding the freeway. And the problem was that many of the alternatives that came out were things that might have taken hundreds of homes along that 18-mile corridor. And despite the fact that there was a public outreach done within that traditional major corridor study, somehow the message didn't quite get out, and when it did, it was very controversial and sparked a lot of community opposition. I personally remember going to one of the meetings held in South LA County and seeing environmental justice activists that I knew picketing and protesting over the initial alternatives that came out from the corridor study. So it was obvious that we needed a new approach, and so in the middle of the 2000s we started over with a community-based process. In the cities that were directly impacted by the project right along the corridor, they formed what were called Tier 1 community advisory committees made of residents from those communities. And then there was one Tier 2 committee for the entire corridor, which included the chairs of the Tier 1 committees, additional city representatives appointed by their city councils from other cities that maybe weren't directly but were indirectly impacted, maybe one city over from the corridor freeway itself. Additional members, as you can see here, of different stakeholder groups that were involved. And the group was also provided with professional facilitation to really help develop their findings and develop what they wanted to see come out of the process. The next couple of slides give you some quotes. There was a Tier 2 Community Advisory Committee report that was produced, as you can see, in August of '04, and I wanted to highlight some of the things here. I won't read all this to you. This is a quote from the report, and on the next slide I'll give you the link to the report so you can go and look it up if you like. But I thought that one of the most noteworthy ones was that number 2 that says health is the overriding consideration. So this really is coming up from the communities and saying, okay, we understand that there's a freeway corridor here. We understand that it carries a lot of freight, but there are people living here, and this is what we need to really focus on. So I think that you can see some of these priorities and consensus here, that the considerations go beyond the freeway and infrastructure to really look at opportunities to improve. Here's another quote from the report that really was what gave rise to the community participation framework that we have now, and I'll show you that in just a minute. But here we have a quotation from the report saying, before you get going on the EIR, you've got to have a collaborative process for community participation that's going to continue throughout the EIR development. And here, as I mentioned, is the link to the report, so you're welcome to take a look at that. So here now today is our community participation framework for the 710, and really a very interesting framework here. And if you look in the lower left-hand corner, you'll see the local advisory committees. This is the successors to the Tier 1 committees that happen at the local city level. And so you can see a little bit about how those are set up, and there I think are 18 corridor cities in total, so there's a maximum of 18 of those local advisory committees that used to be, once were the Tier 1s. And then the Tier 2 has turned into the Corridor Advisory Committee. That's the big box in the center of the diagram there, and you can see again it's very clearly defined who is in it, who can be on it, very clearly controlled as to who participates. And so those are the key elements that relate to the earlier framework in the Tier 1 and Tier 2. On the lower right-hand corner is something new. These are subject working groups where subject matter experts and other stakeholders can get involved in the process. And all of these committees can make recommendations to the project committee, which is the ultimate decision-making committee. That one meets more frequently than the executive committee, which is sort of on an as-needed, but can also make decisions on behalf of the project. And then off to the side on the right there is the technical advisory committee, which includes a lot of staff from the government agencies. Most of these committees meet on give or take a monthly basis, particularly when there's a lot of project information coming out. So these are, this represents basically the community participation framework. I've got a few slides left and a few minutes, so I'll keep going here. I did want to point out also as well what the I-710 project website says itself about community participation. And again, I won't read this out to you, but just so that you can see where this really talks about breaking new ground in engaging community members and stakeholders in developing the strategies to make things better. And you can see the sentence at the bottom there that says community participation is modeled on the highly regarded program used to complete the major corridor study. So this is from the I-710 Corridor Project website, and I've given you the web link for that as well that you can take a look at your leisure. I did want to spend a couple minutes going over several efforts that are underway to address community concerns. After that, I have one more slide, so I think we'll be right on time here. There are a number of things that have been done both before the EIR-EIS got started and in the process of it, and some of these things are directly related to the EIR-EIS and some are not. They're independent efforts. In the truck replacement program, in addition to what's been done through the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach, the Gateway Cities COG, Council of Governments, before I became a consultant to them, they're my client now, but before I came on board, they initiated a truck replacement program before the port programs were in place that helped owner-operators replace or upgrade over 600 older trucks to reduce the emissions. So that was a very substantial achievement. The EIR-EIS includes a dedicated freight corridor alternative that's being studied. So one of the things we're doing formal analysis on is whether there would be better community benefits if the trucks were actually physically separated from the cars. That might be a tolled corridor. It might not be tolled. We're looking at that as part of the EIR-EIS as well, but at least we want to look at the safety and other kinds of impacts that could happen if there's more a faster and a more reliable trip for the industry, for the truckers as well. There's a health risk assessment being done for this particular project that is part of the EIR-EIS, but that's something that's not traditionally or typically done. You may be familiar with it, more done for stationary sources, and this is, I think, the first or one of the very first times that it's being done for a long linear transportation project like this, so really breaking some new ground in terms of the methodologies for analyzing impacts, and a very, very interesting thing that's just now beginning to come out as part of the EIR-EIS. The Gateway Cities COG also is engaged in an air quality action plan. That's not part of the EIR-EIS, but it is looking at different strategies that cities can use to help reduce emissions, things like enforcing idling restrictions or potentially even monitoring air quality in the different areas and collaborating on some of those efforts. So the Air Quality Action Plan is also something that's ongoing and current, and there's more coming out on that all the time. The Health Impact Assessment is something that's been done for the corridor as part of the Air Quality Action Plan, but not part of the EIR-EIS. It may become part of the EIR-EIS later on. And it's been actually a little bit controversial, but what's happening now is that it's being reviewed by the National Academy of Sciences to make sure that we have the best information out of that assessment and are able to use that in our decision-making process for the corridor alternatives. If you're not familiar with health impact assessment, it is a different methodology from health risk assessment. It's somewhat newer and maybe not, it's a little bit more subjective than a health risk assessment, which is very quantitative. So I'll give that as a brief explanation of the difference. We also have, through the Gateway Cities COG, a technology plan for goods movement that's under development. We're looking at deploying strategically some intelligent transportation systems, or ITS, strategies to make sure that the vehicles that are moving freight in our region can do so safely and very, very efficiently. So that's a new thing that we're doing. And lastly, but certainly not least, we're also collaborating. Many agencies are collaborating to develop zero-emission vehicles. And here we have had presentations from vendors and designers and entrepreneurs really from all over the world looking to develop electric trucks, fixed guideway systems, really a full range of potential alternative technologies to the traditional diesel-fired goods movement systems. And so this is something that the ports and others have been developing and dedicating technology funds to. We want to try and do some demonstration projects here in Southern California. So watch this space for some findings on what's going to be ready to really help the industry move towards zero emissions kind of operation. Last but not least, I did want to talk very briefly about the environmental justice analysis. This is a project that I'm doing as part of the EIR-EIS. I think that Sharlene mentioned briefly that EJ is part of NEPA, and so that's really a requirement as we do our EIS. California law at this point doesn't require environmental justice analysis, but it's basically has become a matter of public expectation for major projects. So for both of those reasons, we've incorporated an environmental justice analysis in the EIR-EIS documents. It's not public yet, so I can't really say very much about it, but I am giving you here the link to the methodology that I developed and presented to the Environmental Subject Working Group back in '09. Basically what I can say is that it's a combination of looking at various aspects of the project impacts from both quantitative and qualitative perspectives, and you can take a look at that methodology if you'd like to learn more. And the analysis will be public soon, I believe, as part of the EIS-EIR. I think that's expected fairly shortly, but I can't say exactly when, so I won't make any commitments there. I thank you very much. I tried to race through everything, and here is contact information for all of us speakers. Thank you very much.
All right, great. Thank you, Nancy. So yeah, here, this is the contact information if you need to jot it down if you want to follow up with Sharlene, David, or Nancy. And we haven't gotten any questions in yet, so I'd encourage everybody, take a moment. Oh, okay, here one is. This is from Julie. How common are community benefit agreements in areas of freight facilities?
That's a good question. I can maybe start to address it by saying I think they're becoming more common, but I have not seen very many. I know of one in LA related to the airport, actually. So there is obviously some air freight, but that has probably a lot more to do with passenger travel impacts. And there's also what is essentially a community benefits agreement associated with one of the terminal projects in the Port of Los Angeles, which was the TRAPAC terminal project, and that came through a few years ago. No, I'm taking that back. Also China Shipping, I think, gave rise to community benefits agreements. So those are the ones I know of, but I suspect that they're probably going to become more common, particularly as these case examples become more established. I don't know if the other speakers can add more to that or if they've seen that anywhere else.
No, I can't really add to that, Nancy. Thank you.
No,
All right. Our next question comes in from Joan. Last month, the U.S. House of Representatives voted to kill the American Community Survey. If this program is lost, what are the implications for the environmental justice process, and how can practitioners mitigate the loss of this vital source of community data?
Wow.
I don't want to take a position and tell you specifically, but I do know that in the new environmental justice circular for FTA, which is scheduled to be released in mid-July, they make recommendations for alternative uses for collection of data. And they talk specifically about requirements related to transit, but they give excellent opportunities and examples of where you could use alternative opportunities to get data collection that is going to be consistent with some data collections in the past. So because I don't have a document in front of me, I don't want to provide information that I'm not really certain of as to what they say specifically. But I do want to encourage the participants to stay tuned to the FTA release of their circular, because they've got excellent resources for data collection opportunities.
I could add something to that. Here in Southern California, there are a couple of examples of public agencies coming together to partner with universities to develop demographic data centers. Probably the one I'm most familiar with, and there may be others around the state, but in Orange County, California, many of the county agencies, including the sanitation districts, the transit authority, the county itself, water agencies, toll road authorities, all of them collaborate with the California State University at Fullerton to fund what's called the Center for Demographic Research, and that does a very thorough and excellent job of forecasting population growth and working with demographic data at the local level. The Gateway Cities also is entering into a partnership with the California State University at Long Beach for something similar in our region. And so obviously that doesn't quite substitute for a census, but still may provide some alternative ways of at least working with and potentially gathering demographic information.
And there's also an excellent report that was just released by NCHRP, and I believe the title is non-traditional approaches for dealing with non-traditional approaches for dealing with underserved populations, and the report number is 710. That's NCHRP 710, and there's some excellent chapters on data collection techniques in that document as well.
I might just add that it's almost, I mean, you know, I think it's almost inconceivable to think of the business community operating without census data. I mean, the whole industry of you know, Esri and Claritas and companies that mine and process information that are the basis of virtually all commercial investment decisions. So I mean, I think that, you know, real estate investment would sort of grind to a halt quickly if we didn't have census data as the basis for this information. And so I hope that consequence, you know, gets through to folks in Congress who are thinking about this elimination.
Okay, our next question comes in from Eric. Are there any Class 1s active looking to implement ATMS, and where, if so?
I can't. I don't want to I can't comment on that because I think some of the discussions are confidential. I would suggest that you look at public information from CSX Corporation in terms of some of the innovations that they've used to downsize intermodal freight terminals, particularly their project in Worcester that was highlighted at the Transportation Research Board's presentation back in January is a good example of at least the kind of thinking that's related to the ATMS.
All right, thanks. Our next question comes in from Daniel. Will the I-710 truck corridor include opportunities for economic development, i.e. rail, TOD, etc.?
Oh, that's a great question, and I would have to say that the quick answer would be yes, although the details are certainly to be worked out. The Gateway Cities COG is very engaged in economic development as well as in transportation infrastructure planning. And I think especially because of the involvement of the communities through the community participation framework, the economic development opportunities and land use issues will never be forgotten or put aside in the process. In fact, I was reviewing recently the Tier 2 report in preparation for this, and I noticed that there's a very good section even from 2004 that deals specifically with economic development as an opportunity. So very much so, I think that the evaluation will be looking at adjacent land uses and opportunities. Seeing David's presentation here today on COD and TOD, I think is going to be very inspiring also for our projects. That's a great question. Thanks.
Okay. At the moment, I don't have any other questions. We can give folks a minute or two and see if they have anything else they wanted to ask the panelists today.
If we're short of other questions, Nancy, I might just ask you what impact the Alameda Corridor rail program has had on the 710 corridor?
The Alameda Corridor is a rail expressway, basically, that goes a parallel route to the rail yards that are up in the East LA area and Commerce area. And I think it has probably had a very beneficial effect. The cargo, when it can, takes the Alameda Corridor, and there's fees to use it, which of course the freeways don't currently bear. But generally, to have that quicker and more reliable trip by rail is preferable in many cases. The difficulty comes where you have freight that is not necessarily leaving the region intact, but where it has to be transloaded or otherwise broken open. You might have many containers that come in that contain some freight that's locally destined and other freight that's going somewhere else. And in those cases, you really have to truck it to some interim location, a warehouse or a transloading location. And that freight really can't make much use of the Alameda Corridor. So the corridor is primarily, I think, of most use for freight that is destined to leave the region intact. But I think generally it's definitely been a great improvement. And I'll also say that from the standpoint of the communities that it goes through, just the physical infrastructure has been a great benefit because it wound up trenching and putting below grade a huge number of what were prior at-grade crossings, and this has been a huge benefit for traffic, surface traffic, emissions from idling cars, and restoring some community cohesion on either side of that corridor.
We have a question comes in from Jason. This is for Sharlene. How is climate change linked to environmental justice?
That's one of the new focus areas under the environmental justice strategy, and it's one of the issues that we're going to do some additional research on. But essentially, they started looking at sea level rise and evacuation routes, and specific looking at some of the issues that occurred with Katrina. So those are some of the initial issues that they're going to be looking at as environmental justice and climate change and their interaction. But there are interagency work groups that have been developed to look at other issues and concerns, and we do ask for any suggestions or recommendations or case studies that individuals might be affiliated with to send in that information so that we can develop some white papers and some additional research on it. But they're looking at sea level rise specifically.
Okay, great. Let's see. I haven't gotten any more questions. David, do you have anything else?
No, I don't. I don't think I have more to add to that. What's been said.
This is Sharlene. If I could just put in another plug for you guys to really kind of let us know what some of the emerging issues and trends are as we produce opportunities for research in environmental justice, because the only way we can stay informed and aware of some of what the issues and concerns are is to actually hear from you all. So the website's being monitored on a regular basis. So, you know, there are emerging issues, and one of the big issues is tolling and the implications associated with that, livability, and specifically public involvement and public engagement. I've heard a lot over the last year about transparency, accountability, and regular reporting to communities. And we're looking for opportunities to research this so that we could do better at engaging the public in these issues which impact them directly. So that's my plug, is to reach out to us, and even if you just shoot a short email and say, take this as a consideration, let us move forward on those issues. So thanks for that opportunity.
Yeah.
There was a question earlier about the Class 1 railroads looking at the smaller footprint kind of technologies for intermodal yards. And while I don't know the answer to that particularly, we have two major intermodal rail yard projects here in Southern California that you might want to take a look at in terms of the public information that's posted. One is the Union Pacific Intermodal Container Transfer Facility, or ICTF, which is an existing facility that's proposed for expansion of capacity but reduction of footprint, so it implies they may be using some of those kinds of strategies. The other is the Burlington Northern Santa Fe. It's called the Southern California International Gateway, or SCIG, and I believe that that EIR actually is publicly out, and again may include some information. That would be a new rail yard facility installed in the location where there's a trucking operation now. So you might want to take a look at all of that public information about both of those projects to see what technologies they're specifically using for footprint reduction.
Interesting.
All right. Well, I haven't received any more questions from the audience. If we want to wait a minute, or we could end the session early. Whatever you guys think.
Well, you know, if we have an opportunity just to throw out a couple of more points without questions, we could do that. I would just point out that part of I think the challenge of reducing footprint in intermodal terminals, and the sort of balancing act that one has to do between you know, creating sources, or allowing to go forward sources of annoyance and possible health risks in areas that are that have substantial population, versus kind of more sprawled movement, and then kind of creating more problems for the region as a whole through a net increase of considerable size in the amount of fuel and energy that's used in longer truck movements. You know, among the things that you need to think about are how much we can force the new technologies that are dramatically reducing the environmental impact of this kind of activity, and you know, what measures can be taken to do that, and also I guess to think about the sort of secondary impacts. For example, how long are the commutes of people who are going to work in factories and logistics centers? You know, is another part of that balancing. So, you know, I think there needs to be, you know, this, you know, I think there are, you know, there are efforts being made to include freight, these kinds of freight calculations in the regional modeling that MPOs are doing. But I think we're still kind of playing a catch-up game on that. But yeah, so this, you know, it's a little repetitious, but you know, just to point out that you know, we have a ways to go in terms of trying to model all the impacts of these kinds of locations, and the sort of bottom line is that we want to be able to minimize freight movements, especially ones that are made by the least efficient modes of freight transportation, and to do that in a way that has positive reverberations on economic development, especially in established EJ communities.
Great. So we did get another question from Jason. Will the widening of the Panama Canal lower freight traffic in Long Beach? He's heard that the eastern ports will be getting more freight traffic.
Well, that's a great question. There's an entire video devoted to that that I could provide the web link for, and many worried lunch sessions from various trade-related associations saying, is the Panama Canal going to kill us? We've got a Beat the Canal initiative here in Southern California, and none of that is to minimize the impact. I think that if we really do see a rebound, as many experts still expect, if the world economy does sort of right itself in a few more years, I think there's probably going to be plenty of cargo to go around. At the same time, the ports here, I think it does add an extra emphasis on resolving the community issues, resolving the environmental justice issues to the best extent possible, enabling infrastructure projects to go forward so that this region can remain competitive and not lose the economic benefits that come with all of the goods that move through this region. So, there's definitely a lot of talk and worried looks, and definitely we know that the East Coast ports are gearing up to be ready for these new trade routes and the new Panamax ships that will be able to come through and head to the East Coast. It's a very competitive business, and that I think will always continue. So again, that's another very good question, and I think that it sort of remains to be seen how it plays out. I think obviously global economic conditions will determine just how much demand there is for shipping and for freight, and it's very volatile, obviously, these days. But I think that there's definitely kind of a pulling together here to say, well, here's the new challenge, and we need to be ready to meet it.
In discussions that on the issue that I've attended, I think the sort of consensus of experts speaking was that the long-term effect is, I think as Nancy was saying, might be a smaller share of an expanding pie, but I don't think anyone that I've heard really expects an absolute decline in the volume of freight going through Los Angeles, Long Beach. Sort of a question of how much it will affect the rate of growth of freight moving through that gateway.
One thing just to keep in mind is that LA and Long Beach serve an enormous local market. So no matter what else, there is still a population of 18 million, give or take, 19, 20, depending where you draw the line, that's really most easily accessed from these two ports, and that's a huge demand that will never go away. That's what we call non-discretionary cargo.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I think the whole national rail infrastructure too at this point is, a lot of it is based on the movement of goods. Hopefully, more movement both ways through the gateway.
Mm-hmm.
But there's an enormous rail network expanding out from LA Long Beach that's dedicated to kind of moving like fingers of a hand converging on that port area. So there's that's now the most efficient way to move enormous amounts of goods across the continent, and it would take, even if there were more efficient ports in other places, it would take more than a generation for a lot of the adjustment in the surface transportation network to actually make that more efficient in terms of delivery to most parts of the country.
All right. Well, I think that's going to conclude our question and answer session for today. And Charlene, David, Nancy, I just want to say thank you for presenting today. And I think that it was a really great presentation. Everybody enjoyed it. And for the audience members who are still with us, I'm going to go over just how to log your CM credits for attending today's event. If you want to stick around, other than that, everybody, we will conclude our session.
Thank you very much, Brittany.
Yeah, no
Thanks,
problem.
Brittany. Thanks, Nancy. Thanks, Charlene.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Bye.
Bye now.
Okay, well, to log your CM credits for attending today's event, you can go to www.planning.org/CM and select today's date, which is Friday, June 15th, and then select today's webcast, which is Understanding the Impacts and Benefits of Freight Capacity Improvements, Environmental Justice, and Freight Infrastructure. And this webcast is available for 1.5 CM credits. And we are also recording today's session, so you will be able to find a recording of this webcast along with PDFs of the presentation at www.utah-apa.org/webcast-archive. So this does conclude today's session, and I want to thank everyone again for attending.